Tonight I'll be reading Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 31. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they feared greatly, and the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may save the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. The people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." And the angel of God, who has gone before the hosts of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud of the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them, on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And all the morning watched the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud, looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging the chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course. When the morning appeared, and as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots, and the horsemen and all the hosts of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them, on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and all his servant Moses. This is the word of the Lord.
Song of encouragement will be number 858. Number 858.
858. Warren, very good job as usual. James, outstanding job. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate that. I want to begin by thanking each and every one of you for this opportunity. I truly consider it an honor and a privilege. As Billy Bob announced earlier, we're going to continue our studies in the Exodus series. Exodus 14, 10 through 31 is going to be our text today, and we're going to go through the crossing of the Red Sea. As most all of you are very, very familiar with this story and realize this was an extremely, extremely popular story. Not only is it popular with the Christian population, but it's very popular with the world that we live in today. This story has actually been in movies, it's been in many, many books, it's been in cartoons. Probably each and every one of us has used this story as a bedtime story for many, many years. This story was a life-changing event. Not only was it a life-changing event for the Israelites and the Egyptians, it was a life-changing event for the world itself, past, present, and future. This story, actually, I would go as far as to say this story somewhat introduced us to God. This story shows us the great power of God. It shows us the great judgment of God. It shows us the punishment of God. But at the same time, it shows us the grace, the mercy of God, and the love of God for all mankind. This story is a physical replication of the spiritual salvation that we have today, that we show today. And what I mean by that is, if you look back, the children of Israel, they were enslaved in bondage to Egypt. We are in bondage to sin. As the children of Israel, as they accepted God and followed Him into the Red Sea and come out on the other side, they basically accepted God. They were freed from the bondage of Egypt, and they were free to walk in newness of life. They were free to worship as they chose. We, on the other hand, as we accept Jesus as Lord and Savior, as we're buried with Him in baptism, we go in, we put away the old man, come out a newness of life, willing to walk a newness of life. This a story this big and this popular, when we go over it many, many times within our lives and we hear it over and over, it's very easy to lose the magnitude of how big this story really was, how strong this story really was. And I think that's what I'm going to focus on today. We're going to begin by looking at the number of people that actually come out of Ramsey that day. Ramsey, Egypt, or we might call it Goshen. Goshen was the region of that area. Ramsey was the actual city or town in which they come out of. We get that number from Numbers. We get that number from Numbers 1, 45 and 46. And it says, so all that was numbered with the children of Israel by their father's house, from the 20 years and old and above, all who are able to go to war. So this number actually comes from the children of Israel that were of war age, so that the net number was 603,550 that were able to go to war. If you actually add a wife to each one of these, that would put you at about 1.2 million and some change, roughly. I know that at that time that it was very common that they would have more than one wife, and some would not have one. But for a conservative number, for what we're doing, that's what we would do. Also, if we added a couple of children, I know it was very common at that time for everybody to have more than one, or a very large amount of children, but some of them were barren and had none. So that puts us at roughly 2.4 million. It's estimated at that time that the number of people coming out of Ramsey was between 2.5 million and 3 million people. In the state of Oklahoma in 2021, the population was 3.9 million people. So you could say that coming out of one area, one city, was about the entire state of Oklahoma all leaving at the same time. The Bible also says that they took their herds and their flocks with them. So if we put a couple of animals with each one of these families, maybe a goat, a cow, a sheep, or whatever the case may be, we would also have 2.7 million animals leaving Goshen all at the same time. I think it might look something like this. People for about as far as the eye could see. This was a very, very large event that took place on that day. As we began, the first thing that jumps out to me when the children of Israel began to leave Ramsey, they did not escape. They did not sneak out of Ramsey. They left boldly. Bible says in Exodus 12 and 33 that the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land hastily, for they said, we shall all die. These people just recently, they had just gotten through the 10th plague, as we talked about last Wednesday night. And Pharaoh, naturally, had lost his son. All the households of Israel had lost a son. They were really, really hurting at this time, and they were trying to push the children of Israel out. Not only did they urge them to go out, but if we go on in verse 35, it says that the children of Israel now done according to what the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians for articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they had requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So I want you to imagine in your mind 2.5 to 3 million people leaving one place at one time and completely plundering this place, taking the gold, the silver, clothing, whatever they wanted at the particular time. And I think as we think about this, I don't think we think of it as taking. They was slaves for 400 years. They owed them this. So we have the children of Israel all leaving one place at one time. The Bible says that next thing that jumped out to me is that they did not take the shortest route. The shortest route would have been across the Philistines, the way of the Philistines. Exodus 13 and 17 tells us, says, then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them from the ways of the lands of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their mind when they see war and they return to Egypt. If they had went this other direction, the ways of the Philistines, it's estimated that it would have taken them roughly 2 to 4 weeks in order to reach the land of Canaan. Naturally, if they would have went this way, they would have encountered war with the Philistines. They would have encountered war with the Amorites, the Moabites. They would have encountered war with the habitat of Canaan itself. So with that in mind, God knew that they would respond. And I think one of the big things that we need to realize is when the children of Israel, when they left Egypt, they had been in bondage for 400 years. Roughly, I would say 8 to 10 generations. These people were just like us. They were brick builders. They were construction people. They were servants. They were cooks. They were farmers, cattle farmers. They were wheat farmers. They knew how to serve the Egyptians. They did not know how to fight a war. They were never trained in that manner. So I can see why God went this direction. This was actually the beginning, you might say, of a 40-year journey with our Father. The Bible says that they left Ramsey and went to Skosh, which in this area here. Next it says that they went from Skoth to Ethan. The Bible says in Exodus 13, 22 and 21, so they took this journey from Skoth and camped at Ethan at the edge of the wilderness. The Lord went before them by day as a pillar of cloud and led the way, and by night with a pillar of fire and give them light. So we see that our Father joins them at Skosh, and now he's beginning to lead the way. And I found what really jumped out of the page on me on this one here is the fact that he uses this analogy of a pillar. And if we most of us that know what a pillar actually is, it's actually a column or a support structure to a big building, a coliseum like this or something to that effect. If we look at the definition of a pillar, it's a tall vertical structure of stone, wood, or metal used to support that building, to give the utmost support. So in the event that these pillars failed, this coliseum would fall. If we went on and looked at another definition, pillar of strength, it's a person who can be relied upon, who gives great support and comfort to others. I should not have made that in yellow. gives good support and comfort to others. That describes our Father very, very well. I can certainly see why he would use this term, a pillar of fire. And now, as we go forward, it would look something similar to this right here. You would see them following this pillar, giving them comfort, and at nighttime, giving them light. The Bible goes on to say that they left Ethan and they went to Pihahiroth. I know Matt told me this last week, said that if you don't know how to pronounce something, just say it real fast. And you get by that way. Anyhow, they went to Pihahiroth, which basically is right beside the Red Sea shore. So they are right there. They're right there on the edge of the shoreline. It would look something similar to this right here. You'd see the tall mountains. All those little things at the bottom that looks like ants are actually people. And you can see the pillar of fire going further ahead. The Red Sea is right out in front. So you might say they're about to be landlocked. And the Bible tells us in Exodus 14:3 and 4, says Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land, and the land is closing them in. As we go forward, Exodus 14:5 and 9 tells us, and now it was told of the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants had turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have turned and have let Israel go from serving us? I seen that, and I thought to myself, the first thing that jumped out is how quickly we forget. These are the same people that were mourning the loss of their children. These are the same people that was pushing the Israelites out of Ramsey. They was giving them gold and silver and paying them to leave. And now they're sitting back saying, why have we let them quit serving us? Did they just happen to look around and say, we're going to have to do this ourselves? Did they just forget? What about us today? What about us in general? How many times have we gone through life and been so excited about following the Lord, and all of a sudden it slips our mind and we're right back into the worldly life that we live around? He goes on and says, and so they made ready the chariots and took with them their people. I'm going to take for granted when he says he took with them their people, their armies. He goes on and says, and they also took 600 choice chariots. I'm going to say a choice chariot is probably the best horses, the best riders, the best warriors. I'm going to say they've got the best armor. They've got the best chariots. I'm going to say the choice chariots are the ones that actually take care of Pharaoh and do his personal deeds. They protect Pharaoh on a regular basis. And it goes on to say, and all the chariots of Egypt with captains on every one of them. So they didn't have just regular, I guess you would call them warriors. They had captains on every single chariot. It was plain to see that Pharaoh was bringing all he had for this. Everything he had, he was putting into it to get this back. And the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart and the king of Egyptians, and they pursued the children of Israel. It's estimated that Egypt had 250,000, 250,000 chariots. That number come off the internet. I don't know how accurate that number is, but take it for what it's worth. He goes on in verse 10 and says, and Pharaoh drew near to the children of Israel. They lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. So they were afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. I think we have to stop for a minute and actually visualize this. Let me go back a little bit. Give us a little bit of visualization there. we've got the mountains on one side, and I want to keep referring to these people as people, because they're people. They're us. They're just like us. They're human beings. They have feelings. They're people just like us. They're marching down through. They're going toward the ways of God. They're following God. They've got mountains on one side. They got the Red Sea on the other, and then there's Pharaoh and his army right behind them. They're screaming out. They're screaming to God at this point. The problem is, and it's the same problem that we have in life, we take our eyes off of the prize, off of where we should be. They got their eye off of that pillar of faith, and all they could see was Pharaoh. Here come Pharaoh. Here come 250,000 chariots with armed men. I mean, they had such a hard time looking at that. How about us today? When we go through life, I mean, each and every one of us go through life and we have difficulties of life, one way or another. Whatever it might be. Do we take our eyes off of God? Or do we actually kneel down and pray to God? Do we put that burden, do we give it to Him? Or do we have this difficult time that all we see is Pharaoh? All we see is this difficulty that's in our life and we can't get it out of our head. Get back up. Exodus 14:13, Moses says to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will accomplish with you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see no more forever." Stand still. Stand still does not mean do nothing. Stand still does not mean just stand there. It means calm down. It means relax. Have faith in God. Pay attention to what He has to say. Exodus 19:20. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud went before them and stood between them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of the Israelites. Thus it was a cloud of darkness for the one, and it gave light by night to the other. So they did not come near one another all night long, or all night. So now their father takes this pillar from in front where he is leading the children of Israel, and he brings it back and puts it in between the Egyptians and the children of Israel. For one, it's darkness. They can't see. They don't know where the other is. And for the other, it's light. It's light. It's no different than us as we go through life. As we walk in God's way. The Word is a light into our path. The people of the world, they're in darkness. So Moses says to the Lord, "Why do you cry to me?" They lost faith. That's exactly what God's saying to us. Why? Why are you crying? Do you not know who you are? Do you not know that you're a Christian? Do you not know that God said, "I will never leave you"? God is right here in front of them. They basically have a pillar of cloud that they can see right there, right in front of them, but yet they're crying. They're crying out loud. Tell the children of Israel to go forward, but lift up your rod, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. I know with a story like this, we have the tendency to sit back and say, okay, Moses stuck his hand out over the Red Sea parted, they went across it, they collapsed in, and you really lose the idea and understanding that this wasn't something, it just didn't happen. The winds blew all night long, the east wind did. It began to divide and open up. 3 million people, it took them all night long to get across the Red Sea. But one thing I thought was really, really interesting, they walked on dry ground. God didn't even want their sandals muddy. They walked on dry ground across there. And then we know the rest of the story, that it folded in behind them. Exodus 30, so the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of Egypt. And Israel saw the Egyptians die on the seashore. Thus they saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt, and the people feared God and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So what do we take away from this? And I think the big thing that we take away from this is, as Christians, we have to know who we are. We know who we are. We know where we stand. We know that God says he'll never leave us. Does that mean that we have a cakewalk? No, it doesn't. I assure you, each and every one of us here today has had difficult times within their life. And if you haven't, be patient, you will. That's the life, that's the world we live in. And when those difficult times come, sometimes it takes a long time. For the Israelites, this was a 40-year journey. It took 40 years. God takes time to shape and mold and develop. And another point I think I skipped over somewhere in here is that I lost my thought for a second. Yeah, I've lost it. I'll get it back hopefully in a minute or two. But he said earlier part of this text, he said, you will be my people and I will be your God. I think it's extremely important to realize that just anybody can't be God's people. God is righteous. He's true and righteous altogether. We cannot be in his presence, and they can't be in his presence with sin in our lives. So just anybody can't be in the presence of God. So so many times it takes years and years and years and years of God to shape and mold us and develop us into the Christians that he would have us to be. And the same thing applies here within our lives, that many times it takes a lot of time for us to be shaped and molded into that Christian. So when difficult times hit, stand still. Stay still. Know who you are. Know your Father. Know that he's always with you, that he's always got your back. So in closing, we never like to close without offering an invitation. If you're not a Christian this morning, I want you to think long and hard about where you're at right now, where you're standing. Because if you're not a Christian this morning, you're right there. You're right there on the edge of the seashore. The mountains are on both sides of you, and the Egyptians are right behind you, and they're coming. Until you make that decision, you have to make that decision to accept God, accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Let those waters open up and accept him and be baptized for the remission of sin. If you have the needs of a church for the prayer, we stand ready and willing to assist in whatever way we can. Please come forward and have a seat as we sing the song of invitation.